Hello, my name's Tom and welcome to Historic Cooking. Each episode we will look at a meal from history and we will create a fresh new version. Today behind the camera we've also got Imi and Joy. Today we're going to be making a 15th century English stew. We don't just make the original recipes, we also make new dishes inspired by the meals of history. If you'd like to see some behind the scenes footage, head on over to my channel at @KnitSlips and I'll have a little video of some behind the scenes of making this video. So we're going to change a couple of things about the historic recipe because some of the steps are a bit unneeded for modern days. So originally you would get your beef and you would boil it and kind of rinse it through, and then you would strain that and then put the meat back into the broth. This is probably down to really low quality meat. As we're using good quality meat, I think we'll just skip that step. The original recipe says to use beef of the ribs and 4/4. So I suspect they're using like a short rib. I didn't get any short ribs from the shops. At the moment we're kind of in lockdown, so it's quite hard to get stuff from the butchers. Just a simple roasting joint, fairly lean, it's got a bit of fat to it. So I'm taking some of the fat off, just because this fat is quite sinewy. So the next thing we're going to do is mince the onions. It doesn't say how rough or how fine or anything, it just says mince the onions. So we're going to just do a rough chop for this onion. So we're going to pop the onion into the pot, nice and gently, so it doesn't splash too much. Let's give that a little mix. And then we're going to get ready with our selection of herbs and spices that go into this. So we've got some things that you'll probably know already. So we've got some sage, which we're going to finely chop. We've got some parsley as well, which we're going to chop up. We have a cinnamon stick. We also have some cloves, quite a wintry spice. We've got mace, which you can normally buy in the supermarkets. Again, it's kind of a wintry kind of spice. And then the two things that you might not have heard of, grains of paradise are native to West Africa. It's quite peppery, I would say. And then the cubits, I think that's how you pronounce it. For me, when I first smelt it, it smelt like if you go to a medieval kind of place. So I think it is like, it's a type of black pepper, quite a bit more uncommon now. In the West, it's mainly used for gins, apparently now. A really nice alternative to black pepper. So we're going to put the spices into the pot. And cloves, cinnamon stick, and then we will just roughly chop the herbs. This is also something I wouldn't do, is put some like parsley into boiling water and cook it down for ages, because that's just going to be black mush. Parsley's a nice fresh herb that I would put right at the end, but they had different techniques back in the day. Okay, so that's all of our ingredients in the pot. The smell at the moment you mainly get a bit of cinnamon, kind of the peppery notes of the spices, and the sage as well is really coming through. So the recipe says boil it until it's done. We're gonna let that sit in the oven with the lid on for about 2 hours until the meat is a bit more tender and the flavours kind of merge a little bit more. And then we'll start working on the next step, which is a vinegar saffron bread kind of mix, helps thicken up the stew. That's the bit I'm most worried about with this recipe. We'll see how it goes. So we're now going to put the lid on this. I'm going to pop it into the oven 180 degrees for about 2 hours. So the next part of this medieval stew recipe is adding some vinegar to the bread. This is like a thickening agent. We tried it out yesterday, and personally for our taste there was a bit too much vinegar. The vinegar might have been just to help purify the bread a little bit, typically using a stale bread. We've got a sourdough, so we're just going to get about 3 slices of this bread. Not including the end. And then we're just going to grab our bowl, just going to tear it into fairly small pieces. And then once we've done that, we're going to add the vinegar, and that's going to absorb the vinegar. And then later on, once the stew has been cooking for about 2 hours or so until the meat's tender, then we'll add the bread, and this should thicken up the stew. But this will thicken up the stew. And you can always add more bread mixture to make it thicker if you prefer, or you can add more water if it's too thick. The other reason why we think they used vinegar is possibly to help disguise the taste of the meat, just in case it wasn't particularly good quality meat. The vinegar is fairly overpowering. It doesn't say what type of vinegar in the recipe, so we've just kind of gone for a malted, just standard kind of vinegar that most people would have in their homes. But if you want to try the recipe and you want to try and use a white wine vinegar or even a red wine vinegar, that would possibly work quite well as well. I'm just going to add a touch of vinegar and then just give it a really good mix, just to let that bread absorb the vinegar. So we're just going to let that chill out on the back, far away from my nose. Okay, so the medieval stew has been cooking for about 2 hours now. So we're going to take the lid off. The lid of steam. So now we're going to add this kind of vinegar bread into the stew, and that's going to help thicken it up because it hasn't really thickened or reduced that much. But the meat looks lovely and soft, so yeah, we're going to add the bread in now. And that bread absorbs a lot of the liquid. And we're going to drip a little bit more in. Okay, and then we want to add a pinch of saffron. So we're going to add the saffron in to this as well. And then I'm going to give it a good mix. And now, just to help let it thicken up a little bit, I'm just going to pop it into the oven again without the lid on. That's hopefully going to let it reduce a little bit more, let the saffron kind of mix in with the flavours, and let the bread soak up more of that liquid and hopefully get a little bit thicker. Right, so our medieval stew has been cooking now just over 2 hours. I left it into the oven a little bit longer just to kind of help reduce and let the bread thicken the stew up a little bit. It's definitely got a little bit thicker. Let's serve it up and try it out. And here we go. Let's try some of this medieval stew. Very, very hot. The meat tastes fine. The bready bits that I had were kind of vinegary.
The broth itself is really acidic.
Mm-hmm.
For me, this recipe is more about you trying to punch above your weight. So, 15th century, after the Black Death, that whole kind of lower class is getting moved up. So you want to punch above your weight. You want to grab spices and herbs that you might not have been able to have access to 100 years ago. So you put them together in a dish like this. You use beef, which is one of the more expensive types of meat to get, and you just cook this over your fire.
The meat isn't too bad, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know what to say. I think it's really weird. I had a bit of the bread as well with a bit of meat that I had.
Mm-hmm.
The bread was like all the acidity of everything else.
Yeah.
I don't think you can taste any of the spices, to be quite honest.
Yeah.
I couldn't taste anything else apart from the vinegar, basically.
Also, at this age, they didn't have potato, so they wouldn't have served it with potato or put potato in to help thicken it up. But working with what they had, it's not a bad stew. I would love to see people trying this at home. Definitely leave a comment if you've tried this recipe. There's links in the description. But yeah, let's get cooking a modern day version of the stew. So this is the modern day recipe that I've created, using some similar flavours, but we've kind of mixed things up a little bit more. So a couple of changes that we're doing. We've changed to beef. We are using a beef brisket, which is perfect for low and slow kind of cooking. It's got a little bit of fat marbling through it, which is good because the fat kind of gives it a bit of flavour. We're also changing the onions to shallots. For me, I personally think they're a little bit sweeter, and they just work a little bit nicer with the dish. We're also adding garlic. I love garlic and have garlic in most of my recipes. I'm gonna keep the sage because I quite like sage in a stew. It's quite a hearty herb. We've also got a few more aromatics. We've got bay leaves, we've got carrots, we've got celery. These are going to really help just bring just more flavour to the dish. We've also got Guinness, we've got Worcestershire sauce, which really help bring more depth to the flavour of the stew. We're going to use classic black pepper because that's what you can get from the supermarket. If you tried the modern recipe, then to be honest, the cubeb and the grains of paradise still could work really well with this stew, but for most people, so you don't have to go searching on the internet for these obscure spices, you can just use black pepper. We are going to be making some little dumplings that take about 20 minutes near the end of the cooking time. I'm going to use salt and pepper for this recipe because we're not animals. So for this brisket, we're just going to take the string off and unroll it like so. So we're just going to cube up this meat like we did with the older recipe. Okay, so now this meat has been cubed up. We're now going to sear it, which is something a little bit different to the historic version. Searing will help give the meat a little bit of colour and impact the flavour of the stew loads more. Okay, once all your meat is seared off, we're going to start adding our aromatics. We've just turn the heat off the pan for now, let it cool down a little bit. The pan needs to be really hot for when you're searing, but when you're going to do the veg, we just want it just a little bit cooler down, so we're just going to leave the heat off. So first of all, we are going to peel the carrots. And then the next thing we're going to do is we are just going to take the top and the bottom off of our garlic and just give it a little tap. This kind of helps loosen the skin, so when you peel it, it's just a lot easier. A little tip when you're cooking with garlic and you're peeling it, just get a bit of lemon and then just wash your hands with some lemon, and that will really help get rid of that garlic smell. Now our pan has cooled down a little bit, we will turn it back on, just on quite a low heat. It's still going to be fairly hot. We're then going to add a good glug of oil to our pan. I'm going to take the bottoms of the shallots off as well. And we're just going to take our celery and just give that kind of rough chop. You want it still in relatively big chunks. And we're going to do the same with the carrot here. Also, our pan is starting to get warm, so we're just going to get the onions, pop that into our pan. If you want, you can break up the onions, but I tend not to for a stew because they're going to get cooked down quite a lot. In this recipe, we're going to keep the sage whole. We're going to add the bay leaves as well in a bit. So once our onions have started cooking, we're then going to add the garlic and just going to start adding all the veg. Leave the herbs just until the end for now. I'm going to add all of this into the pot. Okay, so we're just going to pour a little bit in for now. And then we're just going to scrape more of that good flavour from the bottom of the pan. We're then going to add the rest of our spout into the pan, like so. At this point, we're going to add a few glugs of Worcestershire sauce. Again, that's just going to really help impact the flavour. And then we are going to pop in our seared beef, and if there's any juices or blood or whatever that's come out, pour that into it as well. And we just want to add a bit of seasoning, a bit of black pepper. If you've got the grains of paradise or the cubids, and you, from trying the historic recipe, then I would say if you've got a spare grinder, put those into a grinder and then use them the same as black pepper. We're now going to drop the bay leaves in and the sage, and we're just going to top this stew with a little bit of water, just making sure everything's covered in water. We're going to bring this up to the boil, and we're just going to put the lid on, like so, just leaving a little gap, and then we're just going to pop that into the oven at 180 degrees for about 2 hours as well. Then we'll make the dumplings, pop them on top of onto the stew, and then finish cooking it, and it's going to be delicious. For the modern recipe, we're going to be adding some homemade dumplings. If you don't fancy making dumplings from scratch, although they are very, very easy to make, very quick, you can get pre-made packet where you just add water. That's fine if you fancy doing that. But this recipe, we're using plain flour, beef suet, and baking powder. You could swap out the baking powder and plain flour for self-raising, but this is how I prefer doing it. And then we're also going to add a little bit of sea salt and pepper as well, just to give it a little bit more flavour. 125 grams plain flour, 1 teaspoon of baking powder, and about 1 tablespoon of suet. We're going to have a little bit of extra flour just on the side, just in case we need to add a little bit more, and for when we're rolling them out. And then we've also got some water, so we're just going to add a little bit of water at a time, a bit of salt, and a bit of black pepper. Okay, so once your dough starts looking a bit like this, we will then tip it out, and we're just going to knead this a little bit, adding a little bit of water or a little bit of flour if you feel like it's either too wet or too dry. But you don't want to knead it too much because you want the dough to be relatively fluffy. Now we're just going to let that ball rest back in the bowl until it's time to portion it up and then pop into the stew. Cool. So the way I like to do this, kind of roll it into a big kind of sausage shape. Now, depending on how big you want your dumplings, I'm going to go for 8 dumplings because I think that's quite a nice number. So just going in half, and yeah, like this. And then we're going to bring our stew out, pop these into the stew, pop that back into the oven for about another 20 minutes. And after that, we will have some delicious homemade beef stew. Oh, see. Oh wow, yeah. That was pretty good. Cool, so we're now going to serve this up and give it a taste. So, just going to get a good amount of meat in there. Already this smells so much better. My mouth is watering. And we've got a hungry dog. This smells so good, it's actually woken up our little dog Mocha, who wants to try some as well. Just going to show you how easy that meat is to just fall apart with the back of the spoon, not even putting pressure on, and it just falls apart. That's really good, even if I do say so myself.
The first thing that strikes me is seasoning. It's actually that it has seasoning. So the salt in the original recipe was not enough, and the bread and vinegar kind of just overtook most things. The dumpling, way better for this than crumbled up stale bread.
That's delicious.
Better, right?
Yeah.
Thank you very much everyone for watching. This has been Historic Cooking. We would love you to try these recipes at home if you would like to. There's links for these recipes in the description. Let us know in the comments what recipes you would like to see us do.